Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining the State Innovation Exchange poll briefing for our multi-state poll. My name is Tom Leonard. I'm the Michigan State Director. I use he, him pronouns, and excited to have you here with us today. In just a moment, we're going to get started with Ben Lazarus from TargetSmart, our pollster, to run through some of the economic issues that we recently surveyed. But at the top of the call here, I'd like to start off with a few housekeeping items. First of all, if you have any questions at all throughout the program, you can go ahead and list those in the chat, or there's also the raise hand function. We're going to try to save the responses to those until the end of the program so that we can get through a lot of the material, but feel free to go ahead and toss those in there and we'll make sure to address them later on in the program. Also, if you have any questions afterwards, if you'd like to contact us, you can email helpdesk@stateinnovation.org, or you can contact me directly. My email is just tom@stateinnovation.org, but we'd be able to get back with you with any follow-up questions that we can address here on today's call. And finally, I will be posting in the chat, and I'll post that email address in the chat as well, but I'll be posting in the chat a link to the blog post that has some of the details that Ben's going to be going over in a moment. And it will also have all the slide deck and everything like that. So you will get the material, and you can check out that material as well. You'll have access to that, so you don't necessarily have to scribble down all the notes as you're going. You can more just be a part of the conversation. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ben Lazarus with TargetSmart.
Cool, thanks, Tom. Hey, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar names in the attendee box. Hello, Sarah Michelson, specifically. So I'm going to walk everybody through the results from this poll that we did across 10 states at the end of June and into the early part of July. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so that folks can see what's going on. And go full screen. I apologize ahead of time if you hear a snarling little puppy in the background. That is the joys of working from home, some of the pain from time to time as well. So before we jump in, and Tom, if you see chats, please, it's hard for me to keep track of the chat, so just please interrupt me if anybody, cool. So let me walk you through what we did with this poll and sort of what we're showing you here today. So this is a very large sample study, or very large scale study, I should say. And Tom can maybe speak to some more of the why behind some of the states that were chosen here. But essentially we wanted to get a smattering of different states where we haven't had a look under the hood on key policies related to the economy and also democracy, which we did in a different briefing. Across these 10 states. We did most of this study online. We reached about 500 voters, registered voters in each state, and each state's data is weighted to be representative of the overall population of registered voters in that state. In the aggregate, though, we reached nearly 5,800 voters across these 10 states. And so what I'll show you throughout this presentation is some individual state level results, as well as some of the aggregated results across the 10 states where we have a tremendous amount of stability in the estimates. Indeed, the overall sampling error is just plus or minus 1.3% because we have so much data. So the estimates are quite stable on the cross-state aggregated data. And we found folks across all different modes to get them to take the survey online. We sent a lot of text message invitations. We sent a lot of email invitations. We used commercially available voter file matched panels to reach folks. And so we were really kind of trying to get everyone to take the survey in as many ways as we possibly could. We did reach some folks over the phone, not a lot, but to fill in some demographic gaps towards the end, we did do a little bit of telephone research. In terms of the states that we looked at, so we're all level set. Starting in the West, Nevada and Arizona, and Texas. In the Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. In the South, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Georgia, and if some consider Florida the South too. I'm from Florida, so I don't really, but it was also in the mix. I think James Chan, the state director for 6, is also on this call right now as well. In terms of some of this big picture issue environment, we'll get into some of the key findings as we go. We figured we'd just level set here on some of the big picture stuff. In terms of how folks are feeling about their state, how they're feeling about the nation, how the coronavirus plays in, and then also the role of state government, which we thought was a really interesting topic to tackle in the age of COVID, where perhaps the theory of the case being that in a pandemic and a crisis, how are people thinking about what government should be doing? And we looked at kind of a range of different potential roles of state government and with some really interesting results, which I'll share now. So first and foremost, just to level set on the general kind of outlook of things, it's generally pretty pessimistic, as you might imagine. Across the 10 states, the direction of the nation numbers are pretty bad. This is reflective of national polling that I'm sure other folks have seen. But just 24% said that things in the United States are going in the right direction. 67% said things are pretty seriously off on the wrong track. At the state level, we asked, do you think things in your state, and we named the state specifically, are going in the right direction or are off on the wrong track? And that's a little bit more, a little bit less pessimistic on net. 36% said right direction, 51% said wrong track across all of the states. So folks are a little bit less downbeat about their state than they are about the nation, but pessimistic about both, given the state of social unrest, the state of the economy, and the state of the public health crisis all coming together at the same time. Looking at these numbers disaggregated by state, Tom's home state of Michigan was the only one that we saw across these 10 states where folks were net upbeat. I think there's a couple theories there on Michigan. We're kind of, when we polled here, we were coming out of really the worst of wave 1 in Michigan, and folks were seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And we're generally pretty happy with the leadership of the governor. And so I think this moment in time, we were kind of capturing something unique to Michigan. The numbers were more downbeat across the other states, mixed in Tennessee, generally mixed, but leaning net negative in Nevada, and then more majority negative everywhere else, with kind of the apex of downbeat feelings coming in Arizona, where folks were 2-to-1 net pessimistic about the direction of their state. I think this helps to underscore why we're seeing some real negativity, which is that folks are pretty downbeat about the state of the coronavirus at this moment in time. 55% characterize their feelings as thinking that the worst of the coronavirus outbreak is yet to come. Just 22% said the worst was over, and another 1 in 4 were expressing uncertainty, which I think can be just as paralyzing as generally thinking that the worst is yet to come. It's just not knowing, and so we're really seeing like 3 and 4 not optimistic about the direction of where the outbreak is going. Looking at this a bit beneath the surface, it's pretty stable. A little bit more pessimistic about the worst being yet to come in suburban and urban communities relative to rural communities, but still the modal response in rural communities was the worst is yet to come. A little bit more negative among independents and certainly among Democrats. Democrats 3 and 4 said the worst is yet to come, but even Republicans were mixed on this measure. 37% said the worst is yet to come, 36% believe the worst is over. But a lot of the stuff we're seeing in this poll and what we see every day in public opinion research is driven by partisan polarization, and that's certainly the case on this as well. Again, looking on the same measure by some key demographics, voters of color tend to be more pessimistic about the worst being yet to come than white voters, though a majority of white voters also said the worst is yet to come by a 2-to-1 margin over the worst being over. And younger voters in general are more pessimistic about the worst being yet to come, 62% versus 20% saying the worst is over. Older voters a little bit more upbeat, but more unsure, honestly, among voters 50 plus. So getting to some of these interesting topics on the government's role, this is really the top tier, and I'll show another slide here in a second on sort of the second and third tier. But these are the issues that folks really anchor into as seeing as core roles of state government in their state. And I'll just highlight that each of these is pretty unanimous, right? And what we're showing in this slide is the percentage of people that say that the state government should have either a major role or some role. And then beneath each label, we're showing the percent that say it should have a major role. So the top box, the most intensity in this battery. And I'll just direct your attention to the far left, which is the question of election administration, which is just ubiquitous in terms of folks seeing a government role. Particularly in the context of the pandemic. 73% say major role, 91% in total say either major or some role on safely and fairly administering elections. But tremendous support for seeing a government role in ensuring equal access to high quality K-12 public education. 63% saying their state government should have a major role in stopping the spread of the coronavirus. 53% saying their state government should play a major role in ensuring struggling families and children have access to food, with 83% in total saying it should play at least some role. 79% saying the state government should play at least some role in ensuring equal pay for equal work, and 77% in ensuring access to affordable healthcare. I'm going to get to healthcare in some more detail in a minute. It's a tremendous opportunity space for progressives from the policy perspective in terms of connecting with folks in this age of COVID-19.
And we did have one quick question before you move on in the chat about whether or not we defined in any way state government in any of these questions.
We did not. No, this is exactly how we asked it here at the bottom. Please indicate whether you think state government in, let's say, Arizona should have a major role, some role, a minor role, or no real role in dealing with each of the following issues. So we left it up to the respondent to interpret that as they interpret it. All right. So here on this next slide, this is sort of the second tier, though I would still argue these are pretty high numbers in terms of the major plus some role. So ensuring workers have access to paid sick days and paid family leave, 71% believe that state government should have either some or a major role in that, with 43% saying a major role. So it's still the top response for that one. Ensuring access to affordable housing, 7 in 10 believe state government should play a role there. 68% believe some role in acknowledging and addressing systemic racism, 67% in ensuring access to affordable childcare, and 63% in reducing income inequality by raising the minimum wage and increasing taxes on the wealthy. Check the chat here. So there's a question in the chat. Is it possible to get disaggregated state responses at the conclusion of this presentation? I will defer to Tom. I believe that is stuff that's going to be available on the blog that he just linked to.
Yep, the blog is up there and has some more of the slides in the breakdown as well.
Yeah, there's just so much data in this data set that we just tried to keep it focused here, but there's lots of great resources on the blog with state level decks and lots more than what we're showing here. All right. Well, so moving on to some other the topics that we looked at, big picture, we asked this question about, so this poll was done after the murder of George Floyd and really at the heart of the protest movement in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And so we did want to understand, while the primary focus of the poll is economic issues and issues related to democracy reform, we did feel like it was important to ask some questions about race. And so this was one we said, would you say your feelings about how Black people and Black communities are treated in America have changed a lot, a little, or not at all in the last month or so? And we do find that a majority of voters across these 10 states say that their feelings have changed. Just 41% say they haven't changed at all. And I think like a compendium to this research is just the body of public opinion research that suggests that, for example, the movement for Black Lives has gained tremendous popularity over the course of the protest movement, just in terms of the time series that you see on feelings about Black Lives Matter, comports with what we're seeing here. So we really asked folks to give us a backwards looking assessment of if their own opinions have changed. And we find that a majority say that they have. It's a little bit variable by state. So I'll start on the right side of the slide. Texas had maybe the lowest level of folks reporting that their feelings have changed at 49%. And then Tennessee at 51%, Michigan at 51%, Mississippi at 52%, Nevada at 54%, Georgia at 54%, Arizona at 54%, Wisconsin at 56%, Minnesota at 58%, and Florida at 58%. So a little bit of variance there, particularly in Minnesota and Florida. But quite frankly, these numbers are pretty stable with a solid majority, but not an overwhelming majority of voters across these 10 states reporting that their feelings have changed. Okay, I'm going to jump into the section on fiscal policy and the economy. But first, I'm going to check the chat to see if there's any other questions about that stuff before we move on.
I think we're good so far.
We're good. All right, great. Okay, so I think this is a really core finding of this research, and it really kind of lines up with work I've done for SIX in a number of individual states over the last 3 years, which is trying to kind of bump these two paradigms paradigms up against one another. This paradigm of investment versus this paradigm of austerity. And really just like a progressive worldview about what government's supposed to do versus a fundamentally conservative worldview of what state government's supposed to do. And so we asked this question, which of these statements comes closer to your own view, even if neither of them is exactly right? On the top, state government in my state should invest more in the state and its residents, ensuring they are safe, healthy, and economically secure, even if it means some people have to contribute a little more in taxes. Versus state government in my state should keep taxes low, even if it means cutting funding for education and infrastructure and cutting unemployment insurance and healthcare coverage. So really kind of laying out the stakes of what austerity looks like versus the stakes of what investment looks like, which is some folks are going to have to pay more. And we find that it's not really close. It's a 3-to-1 spread in terms of the voters across these 10 states favoring this investment paradigm. And we find that it's actually really stable across the 10 states that we looked at. There's a little bit of variance with Arizona and Florida, and really the kind of the Sunbelt states showing the most resonance towards this investment paradigm. I think that makes sense, given these are states that are dominated by conservative Republican legislatures and governors who have been very austere and perhaps in this camp at the bottom here. And we find that it's just really, it's bunk. It is not something that voters in these states are anchoring into. In Arizona, 65% choose the investment paradigm. In Florida, 64%. In Texas, 62%. And it basically hovers in the high 50s across all of the other states that we looked at on this particular question. And in general, one of the big key takeaways of this research, one of the big key through lines of this research is this exact lesson around the need for investment over the need to just cut. And that's not just in terms of pure revenue, it's also in terms of cutting things like regulations. And I'll get to that in a second. That the idea of just a super free market perspective on what we should be doing, what the policy state government should be pushing, is just not where voters are across these 10 states. So a few more slides on this particular question. We find that even conservative Republicans are split on this. As you might imagine, Democrats, particularly liberal Democrats, are broadly leveraged into this idea of more investment, 88%, 75% of moderate to conservative Democrats, 52% of liberal to moderate Republicans, so a really wide margin among those middle-of-the-road Republicans. And again, even conservative Republicans are split on this idea of investment versus lower taxes and cutting services. There's a bit of a gender gap, but both men and women are supportive of more investment. There's a bit of an age gap, but both younger and older voters, younger voters by a little bit more, are leveraged into this investment paradigm. And voters of color are more leveraged into the investment paradigm than Anglo voters, but Anglo voters are also leveraged into the investment paradigm by a 57 to 20% margin. We see that voters of color are anchored into investment by a 70 to 15% margin.
And we had a quick question on from Ashley about defining exactly what investment means, if it described like public infrastructure expansion. I think that might have been covered in the initial.
Yep. So it's specifically saying it should invest more in the state and its residents, ensuring they are safe, healthy, and economically secure. So that was specifically how we asked folks to contextualize it and conceptualize it.
And I think the education and infrastructure cuts in the second half of the question too kind of get at that more detailed definition.
Right, that's right. It's really kind of playing out what the trade-off is between, cut and actually invest. That's right. And we've asked a variant on this question in a number of states, and we've always typically seen very similar results to this, which is when you put it in stark relief like this, and also when you take it out of a partisan context, folks tend to be much more supportive of the state actually investing and doing something for its residents as opposed to just going away, which is what the conservative movement would want it to do. So I want to cover this this topic here. The idea of health versus jobs, right? And I do think that, like, to some extent, this is a bit of an unfair question, and that, like, it's a bit of an unfair choice. But I do think it's still instructive in where folks' heads are in terms of what they want their policymakers to do moving forward, as it specifically relates to the pandemic, and as it specifically relates to not sacrificing people's health to make sure that that we're not laying people off and that businesses aren't failing. And I think, like, to some extent, we need to be really thoughtful about drawing a better line between these two things. But that being said, 56% say that they are more concerned about the coronavirus outbreak's impact on health and safety than they are on the coronavirus outbreak's impact on jobs and income. So it's about a 20-point spread between these two. 56% say they're more concerned about health and safety. 37% say they're more concerned about jobs and income. There is some real variance between the states on this. Nevada, has experienced tremendous impact in terms of people being laid off and having their hours cut, which I think we have a slide on in a minute, is a little bit upside down on this in terms of prioritizing jobs and income over health and safety. But the rest of the states, we see at least a majority in the health and safety category, particularly those Sunbelt states, where really we did this research right at the emergence of the kind of wave one rolling through Arizona, Florida, Texas, and Georgia. And we see that at that moment in time, in particular in Arizona and Florida, we see over 6 in 10 prioritizing health and safety over jobs and income. Certainly, Democrats are more leveraged in that idea of health and safety over jobs and income. Independents kind of mirror the top line trend with a bare majority, 53% saying health and safety concerns them more. Republicans, by about a 20-point margin, say jobs and income concerns them more. And then voters of color were certainly more leveraged in the idea of health and safety. But white voters also, by a 14-point margin, do the same. And a pretty substantial gender gap here with women saying they're more likely to prioritize or be concerned about health and safety over jobs and income, a much narrower spread, more evenly divided among men.
Quick question, Ben, on the chat about breakout by income of respondents. I don't think that we did that one, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure we even asked an income question in the poll, but we can look back and look at education level as a good kind of barometer for socioeconomic status and try and get you an answer on that.
Thank you.
My sense is, you know what? I don't want to opine on it, so we'll dig into that and try and circle back. Okay, well, we'll put it in the parking lot for when I take the slides down and can look at the crosstabs. All right, so I want to hold on this slide and really emphasize what we're seeing here, because I know it's moving in a lot of states right now, this particular policy. And so we asked if the voter thinks that businesses in their state should either be required to provide safe working conditions and be penalized if workers get sick due to their negligence, corporate negligence, or be protected from liability if workers get sick on the job so that they can get people back to work. And it's not really close, right? Like the idea of just do anything we can, cut corners, put folks on the job in a way that's not safe, is just not really where most American voters are, at least across these 10 states. So by a 55 to 26% margin, we find that folks choose this idea of requiring safe working conditions. And this is another one of the through lines. Again, it's investment, but it's about the money, but it's also about the rules of the road, and that there's just no desire to see businesses cut corners at all costs to get people back to work. So that is just not, from the industry's perspective, they would make this argument. It's just not where voters are. Again, by about a 30-point margin. Just a few notes on this, like there's certainly a partisan dimension here. Independents pick the requiring safe working conditions by a 53 to 37% margin. Republicans lean against this. They lean towards protecting businesses from liability by a 56 to 35% margin. But Democrats are overwhelmingly supportive of requiring safe working conditions over shielding corporations from liability by a 77 to 19% margin. And we see similar trends by race. White voters, 51-27, support protecting safe work conditions over protecting businesses from liability. African-American voters by a 73 to 16% margin, and Latino voters by a 68 to 23% margin on this particular question. Tom, is there anything else you wanted to talk about this? I know this was one that you in particular wanted to hold on and emphasize.
Yeah, I just know that there's a lot of places that are talking about this, and even at the national level. And I think that it's just really important because it gets really loud in terms of that, open the economy at all costs, or this is the only way we can, do this and not have folks harmed. And I think it's just very clear here in this data that that's not where the public is. And so, folks who are willing to stress that message about taking care of people first and playing fair have a lot of support for that. So don't be don't be hesitant to take strong stances on this issue.
That's totally right. So the next slide I wanted to show here is about another topic of race that we looked at. So we specifically asked, do you believe the state should address economic barriers faced by Black people in the Black community? And it's pretty overwhelming that yes, they do. 57% say yes, just 27% say no, 16% are unsure. We saw a couple of data points in this research that suggests that talking about this through the lens of barriers is really good language, and that there's perhaps the risk of alienating some voters if talking about this through the lens of systemic racism. That's not to say that we're recommending not talking about it through the lens of systemic racism. It's just that we're finding particularly there's more white voters who get turned off by that type of language. And there's perhaps some more inclusive language around addressing barriers that brings more folks on side to this particular idea. We do find there's a large racial gap on this particular question, though white voters are supportive of addressing economic barriers faced by Black people by a 20-point spread, 51 to 31. Voters of color are much more supportive. Almost all Black voters, 92 to 6%, and the lion's share, 70% of Latino and Latina voters say that we should address economic barriers faced by Black people in the Black community specifically. So there's some real cross-racial solidarity on this idea. Tom, any more questions? I saw some things pop up in the chat. Any more questions we should cover before we move on?
No, it was just more someone raised that it was Virginia's in the midst of that liability debate right now. So I think we've already had a few states, and it's going to be coming snowballing at us as we go further into the year for sure. So yeah, it's on 22 in the slide deck I put in the chat, and it's on slide 22. So feel free to use that. It is public, and again, follow up with us, either myself, Tom at stateinnovation.org, or help desk at stateinnovation.org, and we can try to help and support however is appropriate.
Good point. I'll just say, I haven't seen any research from any pollster who said that the voters are supportive of, for example, the McConnell plan in the HEROES Act to shield businesses from liability as a condition for getting support. Nobody's for that. It's totally contrary to where public opinion is. All right, so we also tested a series of just economic responses to what should we be doing to help folks during the pandemic. So the way we couched it was below is a list of proposals being considered by state legislatures or by the state legislature in your state in response to the outbreak. And we asked folks to prioritize these and to tell us whether they support or oppose each of these. And what I'll just say is that there's a clear through line around healthcare reforms that are just tremendously popular. So on the first, before I get to those, on the far left here, you see that there's just unanimity behind the idea of helping small businesses right now. And this is something I've seen both in this research and all the research I'm doing across the country, which is there's just so much concern about how small businesses are going to be able to deal with the pandemic. There's so much concern about people losing their small businesses, about the neighborhood restaurant going out of business. And it's just a profound anxiety that folks are associating with this age of COVID-19. And so we find that this idea of low interest loans is just tremendously popular. The rest of the proposals on this slide are all have to do with healthcare and health insurance reforms. And so 89% support banning the practice of surprise medical billing. If you've been in the hospital for COVID and you don't want to get a bill for, a $300 aspirin, right? That just seems totally out of step. And so banning that practice is tremendously popular, as is extending a grace period for people to pay health insurance bills before their coverage can be canceled. 87% support limiting what drug companies can charge for prescription medications. This is also the top priority across all of these for folks, is the 17% ranked it as their first most supported issue. And then 87% support offering people in their state the option to buy into the same public health insurance plans that are available to state employees if they want to. Sort of the second tier, still tremendously popular. Very little marketplace for opposition to these things, is creating an insurance plan to provide paid family and medical leave for employees to care for a sick family member, bond with a new baby, or recover from a major illness or injury. 79% support requiring workplaces to provide paid sick days to their employees, and 74% support eliminating tax breaks for corporations and large businesses that don't offer paid sick and family leave and health care to their employees. So really like interesting ideas for kind of coming at this idea of benefits related to paid sick, related to healthcare, related to paid family leave, both from like kind of a carrot and a stick perspective. So eliminating tax breaks for those who don't do it, affirmative workplace requirements, and then an insurance plan as well. So all three of these are really popular and sort of three different ways to come at some of these ideas around more benefits for working people in the workplace, particularly as it relates to paid sick and family leave, which is so important during the pandemic. A few other proposals that we looked at that were also very popular, perhaps in the quote unquote third tier, but still you're looking at 70% popularity across all of these at least. So expanding a tax credit to provide extra income to working people with low incomes. This is us restating the earned income tax credit expansion without calling it the earned income tax credit, but that's very popular. About 3 in 4 voters across these 10 states support that. Protecting patients from having to pay the costs not covered by their insurance when treated at an out-of-network hospital or by an out-of-network doctor. 72% support that. And expanding the number of people who can get health care through Medicaid. Also very, very popular. 71% support that. What folks don't support, and I alluded to this a few minutes ago, is these ideas that businesses should be able to cut corners in the name of keeping people working. These are just tremendously unpopular proposals. So one, allowing businesses to stop paying more for overtime hours, 85% oppose that idea. And 84% oppose the idea of allowing businesses to pay less than the minimum wage. So these ideas that industry might argue, we have to pay folks less. If we don't pay folks less, then we're going to go out of business and nobody's going to have a job. Nobody's for that, essentially. Same thing with halting overtime, that they can't afford it, and if they have to pay overtime, they're going to go out of business. That is just that is a bunk argument that very, very, very few voters across these 10 states are buying. One of the last ones we looked at here is a little bit more mixed in its support, though it is still net supported overall by a 58 to 42% margin, is the idea of extending the length of time that laid off workers can receive unemployment compensation and increasing the amount that they receive. 58% support this, 42% oppose it. We do find that there's a little bit of a regional nuance on this particular question. It tends to be more supported in the South than elsewhere. So 67 to 33 in Georgia, 65 to 35 in Florida, where Florida has a really, really troubling unemployment compensation system that James Chan, I'm sure, can speak to more. Folks are interested. In Mississippi, we find by a 30-point spread that folks support this idea. Texas by a 20-point spread. And then it starts getting a little bit more narrow. In Tennessee, it's a 17-point spread. In the Midwest, it's narrower for sure. A 10-point spread in Michigan, a 7-point spread in Nevada, a 6-point spread in Minnesota, a 4-point spread in Wisconsin, and just a 2-point spread where folks are more mixed in Arizona on this particular question. It is divided by partisanship, though independents lean towards extension of unemployment benefits by 10 points, Democrats by a 3-to-1 margin, Republicans only oppose it by a 20-point margin. So there's a little lack of consolidation on the conservative side here. Younger voters certainly more supportive than older voters, and voters of color certainly more supportive than white voters. White voters are more mixed on this particular proposal. So we, in addition to looking at the kind of affirmative policies that are going to help working people, we also, we talked about this a minute ago, that folks see an affirmative role for government on a litany of things. They want state government to be investing in its people, in their healthcare and their education. The question is, how are we going to pay for it? And we did look at a series of potential revenue raisers that obviously won't apply to every single state and every single situation. But we tried to cast a wide enough net that we could provide some guidance. And I think there's a couple of really interesting things here, and that this data is tremendously encouraging. in that we found that generally the more progressive revenue raisers were the most popular, and the more regressive revenue raisers were the least popular. So first of all, we're showing the stuff that folks were pretty much on board with. So closing corporate tax loopholes, our old standby, is tremendously popular. It's the top ranked one. It's the most supported across all of the revenue raisers we tested. 87% support closing corporate tax loopholes. This is a kind of messaging thing, right? It's how do we think about pitching the policy that we care about in this context of closing corporate tax loopholes, because it's just tremendously popular. So that's really the way we should be thinking about it. We see a couple things here on the environment. So one, increasing taxes and financial penalties on companies that pollute the state's air and water. 85% support that. And I'll also direct your attention over here, where 69% support the idea of creating a carbon tax paid by companies based on how much carbon they emit. I mean, I think this is really important that we keep the focus on industry here. If we get into a fight about individuals and their power bills going up because of a carbon tax, I think we start to lose people. But if we keep it focused on industry, people are going to be thinking about polluters when they answer this question. And it's very popular. 69% support this idea. 73% support increasing taxes on the wealthiest individuals in their state. And 71% support increasing taxes on those making over $250,000 a year. So the idea of wealthiest versus $250,000, there's really very, very little difference, because the sample size is so large. Like, yes, maybe the wealthiest is slightly better language than 250, but there's really functionally very little difference between those two. And then the idea of increasing taxes on profitable corporations, also generally supported by almost 2 in 3 voters, 64% support it. Looking at increasing taxes on the wealthy and those making $250 a year, just really stable by state. This is not a terribly interesting slide. We do see a little bit of softness in Mississippi and Tennessee relative to the other states, in Texas, so in sort of the deep South states, with the exception of Georgia. But generally, folks are pretty all about taxing the rich in this study. I would note Wisconsin has some of the highest numbers, particularly on the 250 number. Looking at this by the specific question on taxing the wealthy by race, it's also pretty stable. 7 in 10 white voters support it. 9 in 10 African American voters support raising taxes on the wealthiest. There is a bit of a divide between African American voters on specifically the wealthiest individuals versus 250, 87% versus 78%, but both formulations are very popular. I think I saw a hand raised. Let's see. Sorry, y'all. I'm still bad at Zoom somehow through all of this.
Yes, I think we do have, I just unmuted Alma, is it? Yep, Alma. There you go. Thanks for joining. Would you like to?
Alma's still muted. Here, I'm gonna try.
Yeah. It says, unmute.
Alma, do you want to try and unmute yourself? Let's see. Unmute audio.
It says talking permitted. Unmute.
Well, Alma, do you want to chat in your question? Sorry about the.
Sorry about that. You could try *6 too on your end, if that might be. I know sometimes that's an issue with me when I'm trying to come off mute.
I'm going to forge ahead, and Alma, when we get your question in the chat, we will address it and we'll come back to the slide. Okay.
Ben, can I just, maybe this is a spot where I was going to, well, I guess you're still going through this, but one thing that jumped out at me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed really by these revenue questions and also by, like, I think the prescription drug question we had before, which we may get to later, that it really seems like people get, you know, the folks that are making it hard on them, right? The corporations, the people that aren't paying their fair share, the ones that are benefiting from the economic system. And I think it felt like, you know, sometimes it feels like we underestimate that they they see how that is working and don't know necessarily where to direct their their frustrations. But I mean, this really seemed like it made it pretty crystal clear that they get it when it comes to some of these revenue raisers or some of these economic issues. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that was something.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, I think like the populist resentments that got Donald Trump elected are still there, right? And that being able to seize on those populist resentments in a way that isn't nationalist and racist, but is instead really focused on the haves and the have-nots and an inclusive agenda about that's going to end up talking about these investments in each state's people and infrastructure and health and education is a great way to redirect a lot of that populist frustration and also figure out ways to quite frankly make it actionable in the real world by having real money behind it. So I think like depending on the state, some of the levers are a little bit different in terms of what these revenue raisers can be. But I think generally the key takeaway here is that there is not an aversion to raising taxes on the rich, right? Folks are very open to it. They're very open to taxing corporations, and they're open to some punitive measures, quite frankly, on bad actor corporations, particularly polluters. So I think it just opens the door to a lot of different policies that folks could pursue in their states around telling a big picture story that like not only does the state have a key role in doing these things and investing in its citizens, but we have some really great options for funding that, right? So finally, just one more slide here on the revenue raisers. We do find a bit of a gender gap, but both men and women are supportive, women by a little bit of a broader margin than men, of taxes on the rich. As are younger voters, a little bit more supportive of taxes on the rich than older voters, but really not by a very large margin. These are pretty durable opinions across key demographics as well as across these states. So the lower ranking revenue raisers tend to be more regressive. I will note the one that was a little disappointing to us all, and I think warrants some more research and thought, is capital gains taxes. So we did find that 55% oppose the idea of increasing capital gains taxes on things like stocks and investment portfolios, 45% support. I don't have a really good theory of the case as to why that's the case. I think, we're in this moment of economic upheaval where the stock market's really volatile and perhaps folks are concerned about creating more pain there and impacting the economy in that way. And so I think, to the extent that we're thinking about how to sell a capital gains tax increase, there just needs to be some more work, because the way we're framing it right here is just a little bit less popular. That being said, the other revenue raisers we looked at that are a little bit more regressive, so expanding or applying existing sales taxes to online purchases, increasing motor vehicle fees, both opposed on net by about 20 points, 22 points. Applying the existing sales tax to services like haircuts, repairs, auto repairs, accounting, legal services, that's underwater by 32 points, 34 favor, 66 oppose. And then the most unpopular is the idea of increasing the sales tax, which is anathema to most voters across these 10 states. Just 18% support it, 82% oppose that idea. So this last section is just on some of the stuff on the coronavirus that we looked at more acutely in this research. So first, what's the economic impact? What's the impact on the labor force in these states? And it's profound. I mean, these numbers are sad and they're scary, and they really tell a story about a lot of pain that folks are feeling and how this is all feeding into these attitudes. So 38% of the respondents across these 10 states tell us that they've either been laid off, or a member of their family's been laid off, or they've had their hours or pay cut, or a member of their households have had their hours or pay cut. So 38% in total have had a household member had their work situation impacted because of the coronavirus. And another 21% tell us that nobody was employed before the coronavirus. So it's basically half of the workforce, half of the household workforce has been impacted across these 10 states, which is just tremendous. Again, you just think about that in terms of raw dollars, in terms of the anxiety that drives. And it's at once, it's quite sad, it's very concerning, but it kind of drives what we're seeing in some of these other opinions. So we also asked for folks to kind of tell us the nature of their concern around the coronavirus. And we find that it's wide ranging, and it's intense on a number of different axes. So first, people in their state losing work and income due to the pandemic is just a tremendous concern, right? 56% say they're very concerned about it. 85% in total say they're concerned about it. Small businesses and restaurants closing down permanently is also a profound concern. 56% very concerned, 84% either very or somewhat concerned. People in their state contracting the virus, getting sick and potentially dying. The acute public health impacts, also a huge concern. But I think, again, like drawing this line between public health and controlling the spread of the virus and the economy, like folks intuitively get that, right? Remember that despite this profound level of concern, folks are more concerned about the health impacts on net than about the impacts on income and lost work, right? So how do you square that circle? It's that people understand intuitively that we're not going to get back to work. We're not going to be in a safe position to go to work. People aren't going to get their jobs back until we get control of the virus, until we have the spread under control and we are able to go back safely. We're going to keep being in this dance of opening and closing, which is tremendously volatile. And that's what's leading to small businesses closing down. And that's what's leading to people losing their job and their work. And I think this poll paints a picture of a sophisticated mindset around this, that like people are not just going into one corner or the other. They understand this stuff holistically, and we should give voters credit for that and speak to them on their terms on that. Some of the other things that they're really concerned about are being able to afford their rent and mortgage payments. Housing is a tremendous concern, 50% very concerned, 76% total. The state losing revenue, 34% very concerned, 70% in total. And then people being forced to choose between their health and their job, 45% very concerned, 68% in total. Sort of second tier concerns, though still definitely concerning for a substantial number of voters. 54% are concerned about the disproportionate impact of the virus on the Black community. 56% are concerned about problems with election administration, like long lines on election day. And 59% are concerned that the outbreak might prevent folks from voting in this year's elections. I'll say that this research was done, early on in the days of Trump talking about stealing the election, quite frankly, and really kind of going tripling and quadrupling down on voter suppression using the USPS. So like I would actually anticipate some of these numbers maybe being a bit higher today as he's continued to go on that track.
And for anyone who did not see it in the chat, we actually I sent the link that has the additional democracy questions for anyone that's interested and wants to look at that later on. The broader deck with additional policies are in that link as well. So if that's something that you want to dig into a little bit deeper, you can check it out there.
Cool. So with that, I think we'll open it up for any other questions that folks have. Feel free to unmute or to raise your hand, and Tom or I will unmute you if we can, or chat your question into the chat box. Tom, do you have any other questions or anything else you think I should talk about before we get to group questions?
Well, I think you mentioned it a little bit, but I know I know you've done additional polling here on some similar issues in the past. I know like individual state level polling that you've done. Did you notice anything? Is there anything jumping out at you or any narratives jumping out at you based on these economic issues from when you've been testing them over the last year, 2 years in some of these places, and what you're seeing now in response to the crisis, and anything we can understand from that?
Yeah, I'd say there's sort of two threads there. I think first and foremost, just the profound opportunity space around healthcare and healthcare messaging and healthcare policy. We are in a global health crisis right now, and so that is acutely important to folks right now. And it also very much lines up with what I'm seeing in the election research that I'm doing, which is that voters are very, very responsive to messaging around pretty bread and butter healthcare issues, like the threat of pre-existing conditions denying people healthcare, right? The idea that out-of-pocket costs for things like premiums, co-pays, and particularly prescription drugs being just an overwhelming anxiety point for a lot of voters, and that there's a great opportunity for progressives to speak to those concerns and push policy that alleviates those concerns. And we see that in this survey, right? That there's just a huge amount of support for that kind of litany of insurance reforms that will help make sure folks have access to affordable healthcare. So that's one that I would definitely say resonates to me the most, because I've just been seeing it so much this year, and it really pops in the survey as well. I'd also say that, the idea of paid sick leave and paid family leave is just so acutely landing with folks these days, when so many more people are sick, when childcare is such a challenge, with schools, with the, just the shit show that is public education, and whether you're going to send your kid to school or have them on a Zoom school, or, when your school's going to be open and closed. Like, I think that stuff kind of compounded with the lack of affordable childcare and the lack of a safety net around having sick leave, paid family leave, is really increasing the salience of those policies, and making it so that folks understand that we need paid sick and family leave now more than ever. If we didn't need it before, shit, we really need it now. And so we hear that in focus groups. We see that in this research, as it's just tremendously popular policy. And I think, like, at the end of the day, those who stand in the way of these things are gonna pay the price. And we're seeing that in election research as well, in the states where I'm doing, like, a lot of state legislative work, where we're seeing those who have stood in the way of paid family leave as that being really problematic for them.
That's helpful. I don't have any, one last sort of call for folks, if you want to raise your hand or throw something in the chat. I want to double back too, because Peter had mentioned a couple of things about Michigan and the immunity debate going on right now. And I think that is really important, and hopefully we can, help our friends in Virginia that are working with it in other states. But one thing that we've noticed is that it has made it difficult for a lot of, for a lot of folks who are generally in support of our positions, because there are a lot of groups, whether it be, some healthcare, education, nonprofits, other folks who are worried about this, and so they're concerned about it too. But I think that your results showed pretty clearly that for the general public and the people who are the ones actually going into these workplaces, it's pretty clear that they want to know that somebody has their back. So I think that was really important, and I'll be curious to see if there's more work done on that in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I just think, like, if ever there's a time when folks are rejecting industry arguments about cutting regulations in the name of jobs, like, it's like almost totally rejected. There's, like, very, very, very little marketplace for that mindset, at least in these 10 states.
Absolutely. Well, folks, I think we're wrapping up here, but again, just really thank you to Ben for all the work that you've done on this. As I'd mentioned before, I put in the chat, but again, if you have any questions, my email is tom@stateinnovation.org, and then the general help desk at stateinnovation.org is a way to follow up with us. We did include a link to the blog, both for this and all of the previous blogs that went kind of state by state, as well as some of the information on the democracy stuff that we tested. And I do believe this is recording, so I think that if you have someone who's interested and wants to actually check out the whole presentation, we can probably make that available. And again, just thank you for taking the time to spend with us, and please be safe and let us know if we can help in any other ways. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Tom.